Hello and welcome everyone to this very well attended and with a lot of interest webinar. And the session focuses what women of colour in the workplace need from their managers. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I want to say a big thank you on behalf of social enterprise Rocking Your Teens. Your donations will go towards increasing resilience, inspiring and raising aspirations in teens. And if anyone wants to know more about Rocking Your Teens, please go to our website. My colleague Tanya will put the URL in the chat. We actually have one of our annual conferences for girls to celebrate International Women's Day on the 23rd of March. So please do get involved if you want to help in any way. Maybe you want to share your career story to a group of teenagers. Perhaps you have goodie bag items for such as pens or pads or postcards or badges that you want to put into our goodie bags. Or perhaps you want to be a sponsor and partner with us over a period of time to make a difference in the lives of teenage girls. Do feel free to get in touch using the URL that is in the chat. So not everyone knows me. My name is Jenny Garrett. I am an award-winning career coach, author, and leadership trainer. Together with my team, we deliver impactful development to support women and those from ethnically diverse backgrounds, or the term I prefer to use is from the global majority, to progress at work, as well as supporting majority group leaders to make inclusion happen. My latest practical and empowering book is Equality versus Equity, Tackling Issues of Race in the Workplace. And that's available in ebook, audio, and paperback. So do check it out. Again, my colleague Tanya will put the link in the chat. So we want to talk about women of colour, their experience in the workplace, and specifically what managers can do to enable them to be supported and have equitable outcomes in the workplace. According to Runnymede Trust research, 75% of women of colour have experienced racism at work, and 61% report changing themselves to fit in. They're forced to mould to conform, and that can be changing the words they use, their hairstyle, and even their name. There's also some research that came from the Fawcett Society Sex and Power Index 2022, which found that women remain just 8% of FTSE 100 CEOs, and none of them are women of colour. Women hold 37% of non-executive directorships, but only 13.7% of executive directorships, and again, a less for women of colour. Women of colour are being overlooked and undervalued in the workplace, and it's time for change. And managers who are here can absolutely make that happen. Now, I just want to clarify the term I'm using because I've chosen to use women of colour in today's webinar. Now, when I'm using that term, I'm including women who are Black, Latina, Asian, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, all women who have mixed heritage. You might have used other terms such as women from ethnically diverse backgrounds or women from the global majority. The term you use is up to you, but I just wanted to clarify who I was talking about and who we will be talking about during this session. So what will happen in this webinar? Our panel of executive coaches who are all included in the Diverse Executive Coach Directory, a directory set up to connect corporate organizations with executive coaches at the top of their game from diverse backgrounds. They will share their thoughts and expertise on this topic, and I will ask them some questions. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to you for your questions as well. So that's our process for today. And again, Tanya, if you haven't done so already, please do share a link to the Executive Coach Directory so that people can find out more about the amazing coaches that are in it. They all are qualified. They all are insured. They're all members of coaching bodies. And I personally vouch for each and every one of them. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our coaches who are with us today to introduce themselves. And I know that Tanya will also add their hashtag for the event, which is WOC for Women of Colour. And she will also add their Twitter handles, but you can also find them on LinkedIn. So do feel free to tweet about this event, to share a quote from it on LinkedIn, spread the word and spread the knowledge, particularly that we are sharing. But first we have a very short, quick poll, because it's always good to know who's in the room. So I'm launching a poll here. First of all, I'd like to know if you're a manager. Secondly, I'd like to know if you would describe yourself as a woman of colour. And third of all, we'd like to know, do you see women of colour in senior roles in your organisation? Thank you for sharing in the chat. I guess if you don't see the poll, do feel free just to type into the chat. That's no problem. Okay, just give it 10 more seconds before I close the chat. Before I close the poll. Okay, so we're going to end that poll. Thank you for those who contributed. About 80% of you contributed to it. And as you can see, it's interesting, about half of you are managers and half of you are not. 81% of those who responded are women of colour. And seeing senior women of colour in your organisation, 62% of you say you don't, and 32% of you say you do, and a few of you aren't sure. So it's great that 50% of you are managers who can make a difference. We are going to be talking to a lot of women of colour here, because a huge percentage of you are women of colour, and good that some of you see representation in your organisation too. So I'm hoping that you did see those results flash up on your screen. Just helpful to know who's in the room as we have these conversations. So thank you so much. So I'm going to ask our wonderful panel to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Obehi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Obehi Alofboje. I'm a psychologist and a behavioral change specialist, and of course, an executive coach. And I have over 14 years experience working with individuals and teams to thrive at work. My company, Aurora, helps organizations create psychologically safe workplaces that enable all employees to thrive.
Wonderful. I'll go to Marie next.
Just remembering to unmute myself. Hi, I'm a creative. I've been a fashion designer in my past life. So I had a fashion label and I was designing and producing women's wear collections, traveling and selling globally. It was really exciting, but extremely pressurized. And the demands of the fashion seasons were totally culminating in stress, anxiety, overwork and burnout. So when talking to colleagues, that was the same, they felt the same, and eventually I decided that my health was more important. So that's why I started, I set up Glow Consultancy London. So I support organizations and leaders to manage their physical and emotional well-being so that they can develop a healthier work-life balance and equity in the workplace. So I'm an experienced well-being coach. I specialize in executive coaching, well-being, diversity, equity, inclusivity, belonging, leadership, and team development. I also am a diversity, equity, and inclusivity committee member at the British Beauty Council. And yes, I use my creative skills when I'm coaching my clients. That can be anything from collaging, drawing, and even movement. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Wonderful. Over to you, Hira. Not letting you unmute at the moment. Let's have a look. It might be, hopefully that will help.
Right. Hello, my name is Hera, as already introduced, and I am an executive career coach, a leadership development specialist. I'm also a writer and speaker. I have started owning the title of an activist because I do write and speak about things that are close to me. So you will often find me in the paper or in publications calling out sexism, racism, misogyny, Islamophobia, and other isms and phobias. I'm also the author of 2 books, Her Way to the Top and Her Allies, and I'm very passionate about inclusive talent management initiatives and allyship programs, which I strongly champion in lots of different organizations that I work with.
Lovely, thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, Claudia. We can hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Claudia Crawley. I'm from Winning Pathways Coaching. I'm an award-winning mentor, an executive and career coach, and I specialise in working with women social workers generally and with women of colour facing challenges at work. I have 25 plus years working in the anti-racism movement, but currently I'm an anti-racism consultant focusing particularly on developing anti-racist allies. And alongside all of that, I'm an author. My latest book is Undeterred, The Success Equation of Women of Black and Asian Heritage. And just to thank you all for coming this afternoon and choosing us over Jeremy Hunt's budget announcement.
Well, it's appropriate to some, others don't care, I imagine, in different countries, because we've got such a lovely diversity of people here. But thank you. Yeah, thanks so much. So I'm going to jump straight to the first question, and absolutely a very impressive lineup. Yeah, we've got some real heavyweights here able to really tap into this conversation. And I think the first question I'm going to ask Claudia and Obehi first is, what are the unique challenges that women of colour face in the workplace? Because I think we can think, well, isn't it a similar experience to everyone else? What could possibly be different? So I'm going to, I'm asking you that question, and I'm going to start with Claudia.
Okay, so the important thing when we consider women in the workplace is that managers avoid looking at us as if we're a monolith, because that can actually lose nuance. Because the struggles of white women in the workforce, and yes, white women do face challenges as well, they're not the same as those of their global majority counterparts. Now, women of colour face challenges that are unique to them because of the intersection of their race, their gender, sexuality, age and ability, and the stereotypes created around these features. So when 26% of the British population report being a little or very prejudiced against other races, you have to accept that there'll be people like them in your workplace. And of course, there'll be those who won't admit to it or who lack that self-awareness. So these unique challenges we face can be due to what goes on in the workplace and what goes on in the wider world, which can impact on workplace performance for women of colour. So if we look at internal workplace challenges, that would include the prevalence of stereotypes with tropes such as the angry, aggressive, bullying Black woman kicking in when we're merely stating a disagreement or maybe something controversial, or we might be just being assertive. And then there's the trope of the unassertive, timid Asian woman. And there are the daily microaggressions too, such as touching our hair uninvited or claiming that our hairstyles are unprofessional, microaggressions such as mixing us up with other women of colour who look nothing like us. And then there's the outright racist verbal abuse, which according to a TUC survey, has been experienced by 30% of Black and minority ethnic women at work. I mean, that's a pretty high number. So our skills and talents often go unrecognised or they're not taken seriously, and our ambition to move up the career ladder goes unsupported or gets overlooked. So if you take Black and minority ethnic disabled women workers, for example, 52% of them have said that they've been unfairly denied access to training and development opportunities, and that's according to a TUC survey. And then there is the pay gap, which is pretty big for women of colour. If you take a BBC research on ethnic minorities in academia, it found that Black women in Russell Group universities have a pay gap that's 39% less than those of white men, and Asian women 22% less. And you can compare that to the pay gap for white women, which is 15% less. So there's considerable differences there. And when we do get into management, our credentials are sometimes questioned, and we're sometimes regarded as appointed to fill the DEI quota. Then there are the challenges that come from the world outside work, which have an impact. There are the health challenges, such as having high rates of illness and mortality, which is related to pregnancy. We're also more likely to face postnatal depression and less likely to seek help. We have experiences such as our husband, our son, our sibling being 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched, or our children being 3 times more likely to be excluded from schools. So challenges such as these can affect how we are in the workplace. They can affect how we show up. And if they don't have an effect, just imagine the effort that has to be put into applying ourselves in the workplace so that we give of our best. And whilst managers can't be blamed for these experiences, they can be blamed for failing to understand and respond in a supportive and empathetic way. So, for example, how many managers actually asked their Black staff how they were following the murder of George Floyd?
Can I come out? Thanks, Claudia. I guess so I think Claudia just said a lot of what I was actually going to say, which is brilliant. And I was trying to think about the fact that we've got one of the research that besides the Fawcett Foundation, one that was the navigating barriers to senior leadership for people from minority ethnic group in FTSE 100 and FTSE 250 companies. That came out last year, sometime around March 2022. And one of the because it mirrors some of the Fawcett report as well. The Fawcett one we're looking at particularly about Black women. But I wanted to talk about the key thing about lack of representation being explained away by lack of ambition. That it's like, oh, we're not really seeing them, we're not in the pipeline. And this is now old conversation. It's not actually true, because that's the case. That we're saying the Black women are no longer going to universities, they're not graduating, therefore we're not seeing them in the pipeline. That's not possible, because we can see the result that the increase in graduate people who are doing extra qualification. So when we talk about the unique challenges, they now have to feel like we need to do more qualification to prove ourselves, to show that we are indeed ready to lead or be leaders in an organization. And yet the conversation that said there's a pipeline issue. But that's one aspect of it. The other is being overlooked for promotion. So once you now get on this, you do your study, you go and make sure that you have the right expertise. So you overstudy for a job that you probably would have gotten if you were white, for example. So you get overlooked for promotion based on the fact that, well, it's not quite the right fit, or they've reached a career plateau where they have to leave organizations to come back in, or to be able to set up their own business, just to be able to feel like, actually, I do have the skill set that I do have. So a lot of it comes down to bias and what we believe. There's a conversation around, okay, Claudia mentioned that the Black women are aggressive, people of color, or something of that nature about, but a lot of it is because you can hear us. So in a room, and I kind of had an analogy about, the game to play when you were a kid and you have two groups of people, and you have to pick your player for your team, and you have to go, hey, Marie, come to my side, and Claudia, come to my side. And if you think about a lineup of that, where you have majority white, and then you have one or two Black women in that group, they know they're going to be picked last. That part is not in doubt. So the question is, how is that Black woman going to make her voice heard so that you can hear her from the back of the room? So she's going to have to show up. She's going to go, hey, I'm here, I can do this, I can do this, I can do that. And all of a sudden go, oh yeah, of course, I forgot about your skill, come over here. But even that self-promotion, some women find themselves penalized for that, because there is a level of, well, we don't normally expect women to be able to, self-promote themselves, for example. So when Black women do it, it appears aggressive, it appears too much kind of thing, and that's the other barrier. So we have to tone ourselves down, tone the way we use, and you give credit to everybody else so that it doesn't look like you're taking the shine. So there's a lot of sort of self-concocting maneuvering that women do, which is quite hard on the psyche. It's hard emotionally to do that and keep doing that day after day. So that's one of the things I wanted to add as well. And then when we move on, the third point I want to make is, once they've gotten this promotion, so let's assume they've got, pushed themselves and like, okay, here I am, then you get the promotion. There's a level of hyper visibility now. So you got the job, you have to prove you deserve that. Because there was did you get on there because there was a DEI tick? And then you think, did you see the level of qualification this woman had? But this is the thought. And we see that on social media a lot. Oh, people should be promoted on their merit. How do you know? You just check the qualification to see that they bit a lot of one of the mediocre people we have in some of the previous roles. So there's a level of invisibility. I don't see you, but once I do see you, and I say, oh, actually, yes, they is qualified for this role. They are experienced in this role. Then you put in this role, all of a sudden, you cannot afford to make a mistake now. This is hyper constantly observed, constantly monitored. Right? And there's this weird thing that goes on. And I have a point to make about that. The bank that recently fell last week, what do you call it again? Something B, whatever.
BB.
Yeah, there was a comment, and I have to say an American press that did that. They said, oh, were they too busy with DEI because, because on their website, they said they had 9 board members who were white, 1 Black, 1 person from 55% were women. So were they busy diversifying their teams is why they fell? It's a very silly thing to say, isn't it? But it's that kind of level of hyper visibility. Now that you have people of color as part of that board, is that the reason why that thing fell? Because that's the point I wanted to add to this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're going to have to be careful that we don't spend too long on these questions.
Yeah, I know. So
we want to make sure that we have space for questions from the audience. And
yes, we do have more questions.
As you're listening, please do feel free to add your questions in now so we can make sure that we do get to them. So my second question is, what are the ways that women of colour respond to the unique challenges that may be misunderstood in the workplace? And I think you've started to touch on it, actually, but I'm interested in hearing from Hira and Marie on this. And I'll start with you, Hira.
Thank you. So that's my cue to speak fast, right? Because there is not enough time left. But yes, I think as already brilliantly pointed out by Claudia and Obehi, we have the tokenism bias, we have the stereotype threat. We also have, culturative stress, where we try and adapt to the dominant values and orientation. When we try to adapt to the values and orientation of the dominant culture, there's minority stress.
Just to say, you don't have to rush. I said we've spent a lot of time, but just share, because you've got
That's
so much
fine.
quality stuff to share. Then just
thanks, thanks, Jenny. Right. So because of all of this, I think it is very natural that our confidence is rattled. Even the most qualified of us, the most knowledgeable and most talented of us, feel as if our competence is being questioned. And because of that, we also try and work excessively hard. So there is perfectionism and these racial stereotypes, and I can go on and on with the number of biases we face. For example, the tightrope bias, because in addition to the gender bias, we also have this bias which is attached to our respective social groups. As an Asian, brown, Muslim, immigrant woman, I have lots of biases attached to the different social groups I represent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work excessively hard. I'm going to try and be perfect, because I will hold myself accountable to very high standards, and I will make sure that, if anybody is doubting my ability, I prove them wrong. I have to be flawless. I have to put my best foot forward so that nobody questions me. And perfectionism, unfortunately, is often seen as a shield that is going to prevent ridicule, that's going to prevent shame, and that's going to alleviate the feeling of inadequacy, the feeling of being trivialized and not listened to. And a lot of women of color I know would not celebrate achievements. A lot of women of color I know do not take breaks because they feel that they do not have the permission to slow down, to pause. So all of that. And then, of course, there is a huge self-advocacy gap, because lack of self-esteem and confidence can sometimes feel that we are not good enough to step forward. We have this feeling of being found out. Many relate to imposter syndrome, many don't. But again, this feeling of being found out is there. And, it's very, very common for women of color to step down and not step up for opportunities. And there's always be this huge hesitation in self-advocating for themselves. So I think it plays out in a number of ways. And we have to note this, that the internal barriers that we are facing, all of these internal barriers are a result of the external bias and the interpersonal bias we face. So we cannot blame ourselves entirely for what we are facing, because obviously this is our coping mechanism. Our coping strategy is to do everything extra to prove ourselves. So that's how it is. And it is exhausting. It is very, very exhausting. It takes a toll on our mental health and our physical health.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of resonance with this idea of not taking holidays, overworking, this idea of having to be more excellent than everyone else. That seemed to really resonate. So thank you so much, Hira, for sharing that and sharing, the challenges and how we respond to those challenges. And Marie, your perspective.
Thank you, everyone. Such amazing information and feedback regarding this topic. So, I want to talk a bit more about the space of conforming to the culture, conforming to the workplace culture, because women of colour have to, or feel that they have to do that to be accepted. And that is kind of the pressure that puts on a person. Is, the layers of pressure, the hurt, the pain. You cannot show up being your authentic self. So if you can't show up being your authentic self, who can you be? You're a bit of what you think from other cultures, or whatever the culture of the workplace is. One example is one of my clients went for a senior position. At her interview, she thought she had a really great interview, and when she got the results, she didn't actually get through. She saw one of the interviewers, a white male, sometime after, who said to her at the interview she had an afro kind of style that was professional and neat. When she saw that interviewer afterwards, her hairstyle was a European looking style, and he literally said to her, if you had that hairstyle, you would have got the job. How, the pain that she felt, the hurt that she felt, as everyone's been saying, the layers of kind of education, you feel like you have to overwork, do more, and it's down to sitting in front of somebody and then not seeing you for your skills, but seeing you for this. And because of the culture is saying that that's not acceptable, then you don't get the promotion, you don't get the job, and that's that's a very difficult space to be in. Suffice to say, frustration, hurt, and confusion. How does somebody navigate those challenges when you feel that you can't even talk to somebody about it? Who do you go to talk to about that? If you're a person of colour, more often than not, if your friends of colour will actually reinforce. They have the same experiences. So you talk to them about it, but there is no change. There is no change that's actually happening. When you feel rejected, another client talking, just talking about that kind of communicating, the way culturally we might communicate, we might be very expressive. One client talking to her manager, very excited about a project she was doing. The manager said to her, you're being quite aggressive, and she was quite hurt by that. that expression, she actually said to him, that's not aggression, you're mistaking aggression for being excited about the opportunity, excited about being in this space and doing this work. So I find it very interesting and important that we think about the culture, we think about the workplace culture and the type of culture that we're developing for women of colour.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. So much passion coming from everyone here that we've got. I think this probably should have been a 2-hour session. So we've had a couple of questions which are about what we can do really. So particularly, what can a white woman do to be an ally? And the question that I wanted to ask you was really, what can managers do to support their staff who are women of colour, particularly so that they can get equitable outcomes, you know, for them, and any resources, books, etc. that you can refer to will be helpful, as well as very practical strategies. So this time I'm going to start with Hira.
Right. So I can really go on. I've written a book on this, on allyship, but I will try and keep it concise. I think a lot of people were asking, how can white women be allies? And I think the first thing, and I'm actually writing an article on this, which I will be sharing in the next few days, but it's humility. Recognizing that, you know, as women with intersectional identities, we have a number of, you know, challenges which are so closely linked that sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate what am I being discriminated for. So coming with that humility and understanding that this person, whatever that person is telling you, that person is coming from a lot of pain. That person is walking on many emotional tracks. That person has not been listened to for years. And if they are trying to tell you something, then just humility to recognize that, yes, you will make mistakes, and that's absolutely fine. You will say the wrong statement. You will not have the perfect answers to always console us or say the right thing. But if you do make a mistake, then just being genuine and saying that I'm sorry, I need to learn more, and I'm here to listen to you. So all of that, and then creating psychological safety is important. How do you create psychological safety? Is, of course, making sure that you have safe reporting mechanisms. If women of color do not feel safe enough to report their issues or to talk to you, and also understand this, that some women of color will need space, they will need time. So give them that space, give them that time. For example, Muslim women, right? I mean, if I say as a Muslim woman, a lot of time, because I've been stereotyped for so long, because people have judged me for so long, on top of being an Asian woman and an immigrant and a working mom, I might be hesitant to open up in a room. So giving that time and space, and then also collecting lots of data through surveys. I'm a huge fan of surveys. Find out through anonymous surveys, what is it that they want, and try and disaggregate the data, because usually there is gender specific data, but we don't know, you know, when that data is divided, how many women of color are there, how many women with disability, sexual identity, and all of that. So I think it's important to divide the data and disaggregate the data to get the results. But one trait, if you would ask me, is humility. Humility to recognize that you do not know everything, humility to make mistakes, but also apologize, and humility to understand what they're going from, and just saying thoughtful words and sentences to help them open up.
Yeah.
And being patient.
Love
being
that.
patient.
Sorry, Hira. Didn't mean to stop you.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I love that. This idea of using your power and privilege, your position with humility. There is a question, which is, why do we need white female allies? You know, it was a question that someone said as a white female that they'd like to be an ally. I think we need allies, full stop. And it doesn't matter what their background is, but that was the question. So that's where it came from. I want to go to Obehi with the same question. What can managers do to support their women of colour to achieve equitable outcomes? What do you think? You're muted at the moment.
Of course I was. Yes, I was thinking line managers. Now I know that managers in the room, and half of you are managers, and there'll be other people in the room who have managers. And I want to think about what managers can do. So it's not all sitting on the DI lead or the HR lead or even business leaders to do. That as a manager, you can find out what your organization is doing about some of the things that we've talked about. That you don't have to, you could have a policy, whatever, but within your team, you can help create psychological safety within your team by asking your women of color in your team members what's going on for them, which might mean being explicit in asking. So, one-to-one, ask the question, how can I help you, Claudia, as a Black woman, in the organization, in your career? Be specific so that they can respond to that, as opposed to how can we help you grow? That's not, you need to be very specific so they can give you the specific barriers that they're challenged with. And then you can help find that solution, or find out from your HR or ELT or DEI or whatever, whether there's a solution to mitigate that challenge. So that's what I was going to say there. Yeah.
Yeah, really good point. The quality of the question you ask determines the quality of the response you get. And if you ask very broad, open questions, you don't get that response that you really need. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'll go to Marie next.
Yeah, for managers, I think it's about understanding and educating yourself from multiple perspectives and angles. So starting to, this is a great example of being in this space and starting to hear from women of colour and what their experience is. So there are many resources out there, books, and Jenny, your book, and other books, and the ladies here have got lots of resources that we've heard as well, and webinars that are available too. But I think that we also need to understand that everybody is still different. So what my experience is and the way I respond to challenges that I might have as a woman of colour will not be the same as the women in this room. So having that understanding, because sometimes we can fall at the first hurdle because we put people into some sort of box and say, let's do that for them, let's do that. And some people may not respond or react in the same way.
Yeah.
They may have different opinions, they may have different answers to things. So I think it's being open to that and allowing that. And that whole piece about giving space. Sometimes we can't even articulate what's going on inside of us. So there may be space that has to be given to actually break it down and dissect it.
Such a good point. I think people just think that it comes very naturally to talk about your lived experience, to talk about what it means to be a woman of colour. We have to find the language. We have to process our emotions. We have to be able to find the way to get it out as well. And sometimes, we're not completely clear on how we feel. It takes us time to get there. So that idea of giving space is really, really helpful. Thank you. And your thoughts, Claudia?
Yeah, I think getting yourself educated is so important. And it's not just about what's going on in your organisation, it's what's going on outside, in the country as a whole. And there's lots of stuff out there. You can access videos, podcasts, articles, books. Jenny's book, Equality versus Equity, is terrific. And my book, which I mentioned earlier, it's a real life stories about the experiences of women of colour in the workplace and how they overcame the barrier to their success. So, reading stuff like that will put you in a good place in terms of just getting real and seeing the reality of what's going on for women of colour. Another thing is to just ask yourself some crucial questions, such as, what are my prejudices? What are my biases? What can I do to address them? And develop yourself, alongside the education. And start building trust with the global majority of women in your team, if it's not there already. But just to say one thing about this, and that is, that might take you a while. It might take you a while to be able to get them to open up to you, because we're just so used to sharing our experiences and not being heard or being told we are troublemakers, that you really have to prove yourself that you're worthy of our trust for us to open up to you. So the thing that I wanted to add.
Great points, great points. So a question that we had here was, how would you suggest we start addressing and acknowledging the emotional impact of being told you are too much within the workplace? What do you think about that question? Can you hear me?
Sorry, no, I'm just going to read the question again. I didn't hear you properly.
So how would you address the emotional impact of being told that you are too much in the workplace?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, you need to prioritize your mental health and take care of yourself. And then secondly, when somebody is saying that you're too much, you have to go and confront the person, especially if it's affecting your brand, if it's affecting your self-esteem. You go and ask them, what does too much mean? And can you share specific examples of what too much is like and what would too less be? And sort of ask them questions in a coaching manner, not necessarily in an angry or confrontational manner, because that's how we are perceived if we do ask a question. But say, how what do you mean by that? Can you explain this? Can you give me specific examples? And allow them to share what they mean with you and to substantiate whatever they're saying, because a lot of times it will be coming from bias. And there's also this thing about executive presence, because women of color are always negatively judged because they don't have that gravitas or the executive presence to make a strong leader. And I think generally for all women, that's applicable. So then reframe all of that and ask questions in a thoughtful way. But take care of your mental health first.
Lovely, thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? And you don't have... Okay.
No, I just wanted to add just a bit similar to what Hira just mentioned, but the level of knowing that it's not really about you. I'm thinking of the person who received that information. It's not about you. It would never was about you. This is who you are, and provided you feel this is who you are, you don't have to hide who you are. The rest of the world are catching up to seeing us how we are. We've had to dumb ourselves down for a long time. So it's going to take a while for them to go, oh, I didn't realize that that's how you thought, because I never asked. And me, and I'm on my own stuff, I never shared certain things. I didn't share my disability. I've got a hard of hearing because I didn't want that to be another layer. Because these are things that add to the bias and the discrimination that we might get. But the more we're ourselves, the more they see us. Those who like us and like the way we work and operate will come to us. Those who do not will just purr them away. Because that's how I see it at the moment. So it's not for you to take on, and you're not too much. There's no such thing as too much. You're too much for someone, but not for other people. That's what I wanted to add to that.
Lovely. I mean, there's a lot of research that says women generally receive a lot of feedback on their personal style that men don't get. And I think that this is one of those examples, and it's then exasperated because we also have that intersection of identity of being women of color. So, my feedback would always be, would you give that feedback to a white male colleague behaving in the same way? And if they wouldn't, then they shouldn't be giving it to you. And I love this saying that I've heard time and time again, which is, you will be too much for some people, they're not your people. And that always stays with me, like, they are not your people if they're saying you're too much. So thank you so much. It's a really good question, really good point there. So we have lots of questions. I'm just looking at the time. So another question that we had here was someone actually saying that they have a manager who is a woman of color, and they're using internalized racism, vicarious bullying to micromanage their staff, especially their staff of color. So I guess it's that, what I think they might be saying. I don't know if they're a person of color themselves, but I guess it's the same thing that you often hear with women who say, I had a woman manager and she was the worst manager. It's kind of saying, I've got a woman of color manager and they're not a good manager. I think that's what this question is. And just any thoughts about handling that, or any thoughts about that experience?
I think
sadly, sorry. Go ahead, Marie.
People are people at the end of the day. And there are lots of lived experiences and experiences that they're bringing to the table. So this person who quite sadly is, bullying and not representing her role very well, probably should look outward and maybe get some support. So it may be an idea that some training is required. Maybe it's an idea that somebody can talk to her. Maybe it's another manager that could talk to her about the way she's doing things, to learn from other experiences and get some training and some learning around that. it may be that she's in this position and she wants to do her best and it's manifesting in a different way, a negative way. So there may be some support that she might have to get, like coaching, to help her to navigate that situation, because being a manager, there's a lot of pressure that's being piled on as well. So maybe the pressure is being manifested in a different way. And it's, you know, sadly, it's impacting negatively on others.
Thanks for that. Does anyone want to offer any other insight?
I think as a woman of color, because of all the challenges we've already mentioned, sometimes people, you know, a lot of the outcomes are negative. You're working excessively hard, you're perfectionist, and you can hold other people accountable to very high standards. And I think, again, a coaching conversation could help, and making them realize that, is this why you're doing it? Because, you know, you are getting the pressure from the top, because they might be getting the pressure from the top, and they are in turn putting it down on you and translating that pressure to you. So I think asking that question and making them realize, making them aware, that would help.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think sometimes we can emulate what we think a leader is like. So if we get to that position of power, sometimes we still don't think we can be ourselves. And sometimes we emulate the culture. And if other leaders are like that, we behave like that. But also, you mentioned earlier, Hero, the tightrope balance. You know, that manager's got to wherever they are in your organization, they know that one false move and they're out. They're not going to be given the same opportunity to make mistakes, and that's a lot of pressure, and sometimes that manifests in unhelpful behaviors. So there's you know, all of your points I completely agree with, but I think taking that into consideration is also something to consider. So we had another question here. How do you deal with constant comparison with your male counterparts? You're being constantly compared, or they do this and they do that. And yeah, you don't, you're different.
I think, Jenny, you answered it perfectly a while ago. Flip it to test it. So would they be asking the same questions or making the same comparisons for their male colleagues? And you would have to, you know, talk to them and say that, I see that you are making these comparisons again and again, but would you be doing that if I was not a woman or a woman of color? And I think it's always important to question bias in a non-confrontational manner.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, the other thing I'm going to say is, I would say I'm an individual. I'm different from the next person and the next person. So what exactly are you comparing? It's like comparing pear and apple. Like, which part are you comparing? So is it because I have children, he doesn't? What is the bit you're comparing? So there's a part of me that we want to ask, what is the comparison? What is it exactly? And to sort of emphasize the fact that you're a different individual, really, and how is that helpful exactly? So I'm not quite clear on why they would keep doing that.
Yeah, I think just building on what you've all said as well, you know, something that we do in our programs is celebrate your uniqueness. Yeah, I don't need to be like him, her, whoever. There's something unique that I bring to the organization, and that's what we need to celebrate. This comparison is always unhelpful, because we're comparing like for like. We can't do that. So I completely resonate with what you say.
I think that requires you to be self-aware and know exactly what it is you're bringing to the table. Because when you know that, you will see that you're bringing things that other people are not bringing. So the comparison is not helpful, but you still have something to offer. It's about getting clear on what that is.
Fabulous. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a question here, which was I think the very first question, which was, if you've been dealing with all of the things we've talked about, the challenges on a day in, day out basis of what it means to be a woman of color in the workplace, you know, suffering with, you know, maybe trying to be a perfectionist, trying to just hold everything down for a long period of time, what are your strategies for coping?
My strategy for coping is around self-care. We carry so much, and usually, as we were saying, we don't think about holidays, we don't think about breaks, we don't think about when our body says enough, and we need to think about that. We don't think about our mental health. And when we're in situations where we are going to almost explode or it's all too much, we have to find a space, whatever that might be for us, find a space to actually detox in that space. That may be also finding a coach, that may be finding a hobby, that may be just pampering yourself and just looking at the signals, becoming more aware about yourself and the signals that means I'm going to jump over the edge if I don't do something very soon. So it's really having a greater understanding of self and when it becomes too much.
Thank you so much. I think Hira wanted to say something as well, and maybe Obey.
I always recommend having a personal board of directors for women, and especially women of color, coaches, mentors, sponsors, advisors, and especially allies who could back you up at work. And also, just somebody to vent out your grievances to. So having that personal board of directors is really, really important. Taking care of your mental health is, of course, very important, as Marie said, and knowing that you're enough, because these biases will always be there, and there will always be something or the other coming up. So I think it's all about developing that confidence in yourself and knowing that whatever I do is good enough, and then having this board that helps you, whether they're coaches or sponsors or whoever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I wanted to add that this quote from Audrey Lord, I don't know if you've ever heard it, said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgent, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." Anybody heard that? Because that tells me to get up every morning in this body with the biases out there is part of the daily fight or daily struggle. So I will have to prioritize myself. So totally agree with Marie and Hira about that. The second thing is being clear on what you actually want in your career. How far are you willing to go? What line are you willing to cross? There's a level of, we need to be clear in here. So that way, I'm going to step back now, or I'm going to go somewhere else. Because you almost like we need permission to know that we are not being appreciated in one area. Just because one business isn't going to appreciate you doesn't mean another wouldn't. So it's about deciding when that's going to happen. The third thing is external mentors or sponsors. So a bit like what Hira said about having a board of directors. External people that kind of show you other things and tell you what's happening with other places or other businesses. That way you can go and find companies or organizations that fit your personality, fit your persona, where we might all be women and colored in certain places, but we're different. We have different personality types and all of that. So that needs to be what drives the decision that we make. It has to be what we want, and it must be about us. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We've got 2 minutes remaining. So can we not, sorry, Claudia, because we really are running out of time. I want to thank everyone for coming. Maybe we're going to have a part 2, or maybe you want to put your point in the chat, Claudia. Thank you so much. There's been so much in the chat. There's been so much communication that's been really brilliant. I really want to thank Obehi, Hira, Claudia and Marie. You can find more about them on the Diverse Coaching Directory. As I said, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And I know Tanya will put the link in the chat. You can find out about me at jennygarrett.global and check out my new book, Equality versus Equity, Tackling Issues of Race in the Workplace, which talks a lot about what we talked about today. But also remembering that our colleagues on this call, Claudia has her book Undeterred, Hira has her Allies and Her Way to the Top. Obi, we need to get you to write a book.
I got a podcast called Wellbeing Rebellion, so you can go and sign up for that.
Rebellion podcast, brilliant. And our next event is Igniting Sponsorship, how to be a good sponsor and a good sponsee, and how to find one. And that's on the 25th of May at 12:30. Again, we'll put the link in the chat so that you can find that. We also have a survey. So please, can you complete the survey and tell us about your experience today, what you thought of this webinar, what we could do better, what we could do more of. We want to thank you so much for your time and attention. I've managed to finish on time, which is really important. Really appreciate your time. And I definitely know there could be a part 2 to this. So thank you all so much. It was really, really brilliant. Thank you, and appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. And please do fill out that survey. Brilliant. Okay, has Claudia left?
I think, yes. Oh, we didn't do the coaching question.
I know, and we did a photo. Oh my God, it was.
Yeah, I thought we'd at least do the photo. I need to go as well. Oops, I haven't pressed stop recording. Let me do that first.